you have an orientation in 2 days, or maybe it started this week and you already feel behind without knowing why. Clinical rotations are a completely different beast from didactic coursework. The rules are different, the expectations are different, the way you are evaluated is different. For an ADHD brain that relies on routine and external structure, walking into a brand new clinical environment every few months is one of the hardest things your training will ask of you. This video is the guide I wish I had before my first rotation. Everything I know about setting yourself up, surviving the hard weeks, and making it through without burning out, all in one place. Let's start before the rotation even begins. The week before is one of the most underutilized opportunities in all of clinical training. Most students spend that week either anxious and avoidant or scrambling to review content at the last minute. Neither approach sets your ADHD brain up well. What actually helps is using that week to reduce unknowns, because every unknown is a cognitive tax on day one. Find out everything you can about the setting before you arrive. What is the documentation system? What does a typical day look like? What are the most common diagnoses in this setting? You will not answer all of these before you start, but getting answers to even a few meaningfully reduces your cognitive load during the first week. Sort your logistics completely before day one. Know how you are getting there and how long the commute takes. Know where you park. Know what you are wearing and what you are eating that first week. These decisions feel small, but they consume executive function in the morning when your brain needs those resources for clinical work. Make them in advance. Review the most relevant clinical content before you arrive. Not everything, just the most common diagnoses, interventions, and documentation requirements for that specific setting. Identify your support system before the rotation starts. Who can you call when it gets hard? What are your non-negotiables? What is your minimum recovery plan for the hardest weeks? Decide these things now when you are calm, not in week 3 when you are depleted. Now let's talk about the first week. There is a widespread misunderstanding about what it is supposed to look like, and it causes a lot of unnecessary distress for ADHD students. The first week is not a performance, it is an orientation. You are not expected to demonstrate full clinical competence on day 1. Give yourself explicit permission to be in observation mode. Watch how experienced clinicians move through the space. Notice the unwritten rules of the unit. Pay attention to what your supervisor values most. Take notes on everything during the first week, not just clinical content, the workflow, the preferences of your supervisor, the rhythm of the day. ADHD brains struggle with working memory under load. You will not retain all of this automatically. Write it down as it happens. Ask questions early and often. Asking questions in week 1 reads as engaged and invested. Pretending to know something and getting it wrong in week 4 reads very differently. Manage your sensory load intentionally during the first week. New environments are genuinely taxing for ADHD nervous systems. The new sounds, smells, faces, and layout are all consuming cognitive resources even when you are not aware of it. Build in decompression time after your clinical days during this first week specifically. Your nervous system needs extra resources during the adjustment period. Protect your sleep and eat real meals. Let's talk about your relationship with your clinical instructor. This relationship shapes your entire rotation, and it is worth investing in intentionally from day 1. Your clinical instructor is your evaluator and your teacher simultaneously. That is a complicated dynamic that requires navigation. The most important thing you can do early is figure out how they prefer to communicate. Some like frequent brief check-ins, some prefer a formal end-of-day debrief, some give feedback immediately, some wait and discuss patterns over time. You do not need to disclose your ADHD to your clinical instructor. That is entirely your choice and your right. But you can communicate your learning needs in completely professional language. If you process feedback better in writing, you can say, I want to make sure I apply your feedback accurately. Can I follow up with a written summary to reference? That is not disclosing anything. That is being a self-aware and engaged learner. If you are struggling with something specific, name it early. Supervisors respond much better to an honest conversation in week 2 than to a pattern they have been noticing and documenting since week 1. Address challenges before they become patterns. That is one of the most important clinical rotation skills you will develop. Let's talk about documentation. Because for ADHD brains in clinical settings, documentation is consistently one of the most difficult and most consequential challenges. It is low stimulation, it requires precision, it happens at the end of the day when your executive function is completely depleted. It is the perfect storm of everything that is hard for our brains. The single most effective documentation strategy for ADHD is the one-touch rule. Every patient encounter gets documented before you move to the next one. Not at the end of the day, not when you have time. Immediately after each encounter, while the details are still fresh, This feels inefficient at first. It is not. Reconstructing multiple encounters from memory at the end of an exhausted day is what is actually inefficient and inaccurate. Create a personal template for your notes before your rotation starts. Even a rough outline of the sections you need to hit gives your brain a scaffold to work from instead of a blank page. If your setting allows voice memos, use them immediately after patient encounters to capture key details before they disappear from working memory. Transcribe them during documentation time. Pair documentation with something that gives you a small dopamine boost. A specific playlist you only use while charting, a good drink, a comfortable spot you only use for documentation. Your brain responds to environmental cues. Use that strategically. If you find yourself consistently behind on documentation, bring it up with your clinical instructor early. Frame it as wanting to find a more efficient system, not as struggling. Most supervisors will help you problem solve if you approach it proactively. Now let's talk about feedback. Because in clinical settings, feedback is constant, and for ADHD brains with rejection sensitivity, it can be one of the hardest parts of the entire experience. Feedback in clinical training is not personal, even when it feels personal. It is information about a specific skill or behavior in a specific moment, not a verdict on your capability or your worth. When feedback lands hard, the goal is not to process it immediately. The goal is to survive the first wave of the emotional response without making it worse. It is completely professional to say, "Thank you, I am going to think about how to apply that," then give yourself time before you actually sit with the content of what was said. After the emotional intensity passes, come back to the feedback with a clear frame. What specifically was observed? What can I do differently? What did I actually do well that I might be minimizing right now? That last question matters. ADHD brains with rejection sensitivity have a strong negativity bias. We amplify criticism and dismiss wins automatically. Forcing yourself to name something you did well is not toxic positivity. It is correcting a perceptual distortion. Use a structured debrief after hard feedback moments. Write down what happened, what was in your control, what was not, what you can take forward, and one thing you did well. Then close it and let it go for the night. Let's talk about managing your energy across a full rotation, because this is where ADHD students most commonly derail even when they start strong. Rotations have a way of consuming everything if you let them. The days are long, the cognitive load is high, and it is easy to come home with nothing left for the things that keep you functional. This is where your non-negotiables matter most. These are the 2 or 3 things that when you do them consistently, keep your nervous system regulated enough to show up well the next day. Sleep is always on this list. Beyond that, yours might be movement, a real meal, 10 minutes of quiet, a phone call with someone who knows you outside of school. Whatever they are, identify them before the rotation starts and protect them like clinical obligations. Because for your brain, they basically are, there will be weeks where survival mode is the honest answer. That is okay. Survival mode works best as a short-term response to a temporary spike, not as a permanent operating mode. Know the difference and course correct as soon as you can. The rotation has an end date. Keep your eyes on it. Do a weekly nervous system check-in every Sunday. How did I sleep? Did I eat real meals? Did I move my body? Did I feel emotionally reactive this week? What drained me most? 5 questions, 5 minutes, honest answers, not to judge yourself, just to get data before the next week begins. Let's talk about how to end a rotation well, because I think this is something most students completely skip. The end of a rotation is not just the absence of that rotation, it is a transition, and transitions are hard for ADHD brains. The routine you built, the environment you finally figured out, the relationships you developed, all of that is ending and something new is beginning. Give yourself intentional transition time between rotations, even a few days of deliberately not starting the next thing before you need to. Let your nervous system decompress from the one that just ended before it has to adapt to the next one. Do an end of rotation debrief with yourself. What did I learn clinically that I want to carry forward? What did I learn about myself? What was the hardest moment and how did I get through it? What would I tell myself at the beginning of this rotation knowing what I know now? These questions are not just reflective, they are how you build genuine clinical wisdom over time. Each rotation teaches you something you could not have learned any other way, even the hard ones. Especially the hard ones. And then before the next rotation begins, go back to your pre-rotation checklist, reduce the unknowns, sort your logistics, review the relevant content, set up your support system. Every rotation gets easier, not because they get less demanding, but because you get better at setting yourself up. I want to close with something I think ADHD students in clinical training need to hear more often. The fact that you are navigating clinical rotations with an ADHD brain is not a small thing. You are doing everything your neurotypical peers are doing while also managing a nervous system that requires significantly more intentional maintenance. The extra effort you put into preparing, into managing your documentation, into regulating your emotions after hard feedback, into protecting your sleep and your non-negotiables during intensive rotations, none of that is visible to the people around you. But it is real, and it matters. You are not behind, you are not less capable, you are doing this a different way and building systems that will serve you for the rest of your career. Every rotation you complete is a deposit into a version of yourself that is more skilled, more self-aware, and more equipped for the clinical life ahead. Trust the process even when it is uncomfortable. Especially when it is uncomfortable. If you want all of this in a format you can actually use during your rotations, the Mind and Motion Clinical Focus Guide Workbook has a full set of rotation-specific pages. The rotation intake page to fill out the week before you start, the weekly rotation reflection to use throughout the placement, the difficult interaction debrief for hard feedback moments, and the end of rotation debrief to close each placement with intention. All of it is designed specifically for ADHD brains in clinical training. The reading guide and workbook are both linked in the description along with the complete bundle. Structure your mind, move with purpose. I will see you in the next one.